Awesome, thank you. Is this starting to make a little bit more sense now? You guys are looking a little bit more comfortable. We were talking a lot last night. We know how much this is, and I was lamenting the fact that when we present stuff in this way and all together like this, that it looks like we just snapped our fingers and it came together, and that's a really dangerous illusion, right? It's not how it happened. Kimberly and I were sitting at breakfast this morning, picking apart every youth program that we have, and talking about the ways in which they need to improve and get better. And so when we talk about programs, don't want to pass along the illusion that A, this all happened overnight, and B, that these programs are just perfect and above reproach. It's a very imperfect thing, all of it. But we do want to share a little bit more, like Seth and Joe follow along in the same vein, share a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of some of the programs we spoke about yesterday. So in the same way as we did yesterday, we're going to show you the logo on the slide. Again, it's got captioning in the electronic version. If you had it, we'll try and do some audio descriptions of the logos as we go as well. The title of each slide is the funding stream, so we wanted to kind of bring some clarity there and talk explicitly about where these programs are being funded as well.
And Charlie brought up a good point. We are never going to be complacent, and that is the number one rule within Able South Carolina, and this is something that I continuously say to our staff. We can always do a better job. So we do pick apart our programs constantly because we can always improve. We refuse to be complacent. One thing that I do want to let you all know, before you start writing grants, a lot of these grants that we're getting ready to talk about are all reimbursable grants. It is very important to have unrestricted funds because when you have reimbursable grants, you have to put up money up front and then send the reimbursements to the funder. So one of the goals that our board had early on is that we would have at least $250,000 in unrestricted funds so that we can continue to write grants. As we continue to grow, we are needing way much more than $250,000. So we have a strategy to do that. I also just want to answer one question that we got on a Post-it note. We received a question that said, in South Carolina, youth increased to 59 to 50 and 56% overall consumers. Is that because you quit serving so many non-youth, or did they increase the overall numbers? And we were serving a very low percentage about 7 years ago of young adults. So that was one of the areas that we picked apart in the very beginning, and we started to do more outreach, and of course, as our program started to grow, but our adult services are just as important. So that answer is that our overall consumer base significantly grew. We report about 1,300 consumers one-on-one services on our 704, but our overall reach is 10,000 with group services and everything. So we're going to start talking about EQUIP. And EQUIP was our first young adult program, and it was funded by the DD Council, which is a very good relationship to have. The DD Council typically will give you seed funding for 3 years, whatever the term is. Our state recognizes the importance of self-advocacy, and their self-advocacy grants are permanent as long as we do a good job. So fortunately, we have a significant amount of funding from the DD Council for our self-advocacy projects. So EQUIP, we get about $113,500 annually to do our EQUIP program. And we do get a little bit of funding, part of that from Family Connections of South Carolina, which is the PTI, which I'll talk more about later. And also, we put in youth leadership development in our state plan for independent living. So all centers in our state, we have 3 centers for independent living in our state, all of them are doing something around youth.
Yeah, so the nuts and bolts of this is that at its core, this is kind of really where we see all of our other youth programming extending from. So at its core, it's a program for young adults, run by young adults. one of the really important things here is just, it's probably my least favorite part about it, but one of the most necessary, is just having that transparency with stakeholders. So we have quarterly stakeholder meetings, which sounds like a contradiction. So it's a program run by youth, that we want that youth leadership development and having that meaningful opportunity for them to lead their own program and run their own program. But on the other hand, you know, we try and create that transparency with stakeholders. This is important, right? We don't want them to run the program, but we want them to understand that this is part of their community and this is a resource that they have access to. So Equip is run by one full-time coordinator, roughly 6 part-time staff. We have 15, the slide says 13, but we're at 15 paid young adult leaders that range in age right now from 16 to 24, 25. So this is the crux, right? Yesterday I was talking about content area expertise. That's not to be confused with consumer choice, or consumer control. I'm not an expert on anybody's path, but having the understanding of transition and having that really intimate knowledge so that you can speak to other professionals is key. What's also key is that when you're talking about these things, Sierra was talking about it earlier, Mary too, having those youth with you. I've drawn a line in the sand. Now, I'll train teachers on self-determination all day and the importance of self-advocacy and student-led IEPs, but I'll almost never do it unless there's a young adult right beside me telling those professionals how that's impacted them personally and why that matters to youth personally. So that's a big part of it.
And the Equip program did not start off with $113,000. We started off at $10,000, and it was the first self-advocacy program in our state, and it was actually funded by the National Youth Leadership Network. So it was a national program that assisted us. We actually subcontracted with them to provide this self-advocacy training to our young adults. They said, oh, you guys have it, we're gonna go ahead and just step aside, and then we applied for the larger grant. So this program has been building gradually throughout the years. It's one of our most popular programs within our organization because we have youth in the community telling the story about Ed Roberts, telling the IL, getting IL spread throughout. We're one of our fundraisers that we're getting ready to do. We're trying to get a fully accessible van so that we can get youth more on the roads in South Carolina, sharing the story of independent living, the independent living philosophy. So, any questions about the Equip program?
Okay. One there right by the door. Oh. Tim's got it.
I have a question. I put it on a sticky note, but might as well ask it now. My center is a Part B center only. So we work off of about $300,000 annually. How are we, and I'm asking this as a whole, how are we to get out and have the funds when we're not able to advertise, and VR is defiant, will not work with us?
Well, a lot of our programs, a lot of our youth programs started with Part B funding, but yesterday I explained that when I came on to our center, all we had was Part C funding, and the importance of diversifying your funding. You never want to rely on your federal funds at all, and so that was a goal within our organization to start reaching out and advertising. You can advertise. You can't say advertise. You can't provide marketing services with your federal funds, but you can provide outreach and you can provide education in the community. Right.
Yeah, that's a great. Sorry.
I know that, but for 4 years, I've been the youth coordinator, and I have gone to the 33 schools in one county that I serve. and been turned down to get into their school. So what does it take for me to get in?
And it's difficult, and we're going to talk about that in just a few more slides. And then if we don't answer your questions up here, feel free to pull us aside and talk. It took us about 2 years to get into the school, so it does take time. But it's all about these relationships. It's all making, networking, bringing the youth with you to share the story of how self-determination, self-advocacy. Teachers talk a teacher language. That's why I brought an education expert on our staff. They speak this very odd language that I don't understand, but all I can do is push IL. But Charlie can understand the education terminology. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second.
It's a great question, and I'm assuming that you bringing it up means that it's an issue elsewhere in the room as well. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah.
I see a couple heads nodding. Okay, we're gonna talk more about that, because that's a really important thing to discuss more in depth. So Project Inclusion is another example of a program that did not just spring up overnight. This started as a project that was funded out of a regional United Way office, very small project, going into schools with a very limited number of staff, running it, working with students in group instruction in the classroom, working on things like self-advocacy, skill instruction, and goal setting, and this type of skill building in the school. It was later picked up by the DD Council. This is another Developmental Disabilities Council grant currently. This is the third year, so it's in the last year of a 3-year grant with the DD Council. It started as it was $30,000 in the first year, and you see on this slide it's decreased. Now in the third year we're at $13,800 annually. One of the really important parts about this project is that it's a systems approach. So we work with youth. It provides us the funding that we need to work with youth directly in the classroom. It also stipulates that we need to go out and train teachers and families too. So the way that we do that is with youth. Thank you. So we use equipped leaders. We try and get that youth voice. We always have this image in our mind of what it looks like for the teachers to be in the desks and front of the room, teaching them what they need to know, and so that's a big part of Project Inclusion now.
And with being on the third year, we've already sustained this program, and we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, fantastic point. Okay.
So with Project Rise, this grant is a little bit more complicated. It provides one-on-one services, but also a lot of the systems advocacy, because we had a dilemma within our state. We have one of the highest unemployment rates for people with disabilities in our state, and nobody was doing anything about it on the statewide level. So we took that initiative and went to go talk to our governor. And I had a meeting with her. I did a little bit of stalking. I went to a yoga session that she was at, so I talked to her there, and she connected us with our Department of Employment Works and said, you two need to come up with some kind of task force to address the employment barriers that individuals with disabilities are facing in South Carolina. So with that, we created the South Carolina Disability Employment Coalition, which is made up of 30 stakeholders. Well, it says 20 there, but I believe it was
we're
about,
close to 40 now.
Yeah. So it's great, and the reason why we work with everyone, we want stakeholders involved, because they also provide outreach. They will sell your program. We also give them ownership of the coalition. So it's not Able South Carolina's coalition, but it's everyone's coalition. And that has been able to grow our programs significantly, and I know you guys do that as well. So we have a subcommittee that is actually within this coalition. It's a committee that focuses on transition to careers that are looking at youth and how we can improve that transition from high school into the employment world. So we're doing a lot of work. We have 7 part-time staff members that are working on this program, and this program is, this is part of growing. This program is already sustained. We're on the last year of funding, but that Employment First grant that I talked about yesterday, that is going to sustain this program, as well as Ticket to Work, which is an employment network within Social Security. So from day one of a grant, we work on sustainability. And that's how we've grown very quickly.
And so this is important too, right? We have this committee that specifically looks at transition from an interagency perspective with self-advocates on the committee as well, talking about those transition-specific things. This is not a youth-specific coalition. We're looking at issues in disability employment across the state, but this involves youth, and so youth need to be at the table, and it needs to be accessible for everyone concerned.
Youth Leadership Network Forum, we get $50,000 annually, which is great for our Youth Leadership Forum. We obviously use that funding to rent out the university. We also provide personal care attendants to assist during the actual overnight experiences. We use paratransit, which is actually in-kind donation. We go to the State House to talk with legislators. But we treat this program like a year-long program. We're working on it all year, although it's only a overnight summer experience. This is a year-wide program because we're also wanting to continuously to engage the delegates. So with this $50,000, we're also able to fund one part-time coordinator, 11 part-time staffs, and we also fund some of the equipped leaders. And when I say part-time staff members, they're typically full-time staff members with pieces of grants. They have grant hours delegated to their time.
Yeah. We haven't been holding true to our promise and asking for questions for each one of these programs. Does anyone have any questions so far? Yes. Thank you.
And real quick, let me just mention, we do love our other centers for independent living in our state. So we also share a little bit of the funding that we get with them. We pay them each $3,000 to assist us with staffing WILF, with outreach, with getting applications, with planning the actual event. So it is a statewide IL run program. So just wanted to point that out.
Just what does MIOB stand for? And you guys just think of ideas and then bring them? I mean, because you guys are just popping out all these different ideas.
Yeah, short answer is yes, but it's based off the need. So what are the big problems in South Carolina? How can we fix them? And then we develop these programs. We have a lot of creative minds that are on our staff. We develop these programs and we pitch them. Sometimes we don't get funded, so we try again with another funder. And so it's just not giving up. And really looking at the need of what our youth are facing.
What was the acronym? MYOB?
MIOB?
MIOB? Was that on the pre?
WIOA.
Oh, so the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. We're going to talk more about this because it's a new piece of legislation that's it's all about transition. Well, it's not all about transition, but there's a big piece about transition. So
some people have been calling it WIOA.
WIOA or WIOA.
Yeah.
Well, I think WIOA means something naughty in another language, so
You're
don't
not
say
supposed to
WIOA.
say that.
Yeah.
And I'll just add.
Great question.
I'll just add quick. I think all of us would agree up here that we got one door to open.
Right.
Yeah.
So we knocked on a lot of doors, and that one connection we made then built into all these other things.
Or following your governor to yoga.
Or
Yeah.
stalking him to yoga. Yeah.
They're just happy to offer all this to you?
I think we all had to prove ourselves. He asked if they're just offering this to us.
No.
We all had to prove ourselves.
And it's really, and that's something that we want to point out too. It's more than just asking for funding. It's proving ourselves prior to asking for funding. So some of these programs, like Project Inclusion, we actually tested it out prior to asking for funding for it. We wanted to make sure it works first and can meet the needs of the community. So relationships are significant before you can ask for funding.
Yeah. Question in the back.
For your guys' Youth Leadership Forum, how did you go about approaching the university, and did they assist you guys with any of the cost initially?
They do provide us some in-kind donations towards the food, and we get a Pepsi donation from Pepsi's in South Carolina, so Pepsi donates significantly to us. We just really talk to them. We actually go to a smaller university, so it's not the University of South Carolina. We go to Columbia College, which has dorms. It's very difficult to find accessible dorms. So we had to do a lot of tours of campuses, and then we found one who could definitely work with us. So we made sure that all of the rooms were accessible. We could adjust the beds. It takes a lot of planning to make sure that all of the events and programs are accessible to everyone with a disability.
Yeah, fantastic questions. And with YLF in particular, you know, we were we helped with YLF before it was a project that we were at the lead of. So we were seeing things like students were reporting back, or young adults at the end of a YLF were reporting back that they 80 to 90% of them were talking about having never met a successful adult with a disability. You know, and so we're hearing these things and we're like, this has to be our baby. We have to take this. We have to confront young adults with successful people with disabilities.
And this is one of those permanent funding sources as well. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So I'm hearing all this and I'm seeing this, but you guys make it sound like it's really easy to work with like colleges. And I'm in a town where our university is like right down the street from our office, and it's nothing but red tape. I mean, it's taken, since I've held this position, it's taken 8-9 months, and finally they're reaching out to our agency. So I'm just kind of curious, like, on paper, on there, it looks great, but how do you get through the red tape? I mean, it's not easy, like everybody says, it's not easy working with a school district, but it's not any easier working with universities.
Yeah.
Right. And we started with the Department of Disability Services within the universities and the colleges, and they weren't very helpful. So we went above that. We went to the residence hall coordinator. We went to the dean. We went to a professor that we knew that as a leadership coach that we established a relationship with. So we really, you know, we failed a lot, and then we just kept trying until we got a yes. So it's a lot of being annoying.
Yeah, we talk candidly all the time. Like, South Carolina stinks. You know, we're sixth lowest in employment outcomes for adults with disabilities. Like, we're, you know, their outcomes do not paint a picture of a South Carolina that's, you know, rainbows and koala bears eating eucalyptus leaves, and it's just not, it's not perfect, and it's not easy, and we push every single day. We push. It's very, very rarely just open doors.
And it's really keeping up with relationships, going to have coffee with your funders. And, you know, I think I text our funders now and just check in with them and see how they're doing. Their jobs are just as stressful as ours. So getting that relationship with them is significant. And we usually like our funders too. So some of them have turned into our friends, and that's really important. And they trust our organization, and they see the outcomes that we produce, and they're going to continue funding us because we're going to continue to do good work. So that's important.
It's a fantastic point. I'm glad you mentioned it.
Yeah.
Keep us on task with that, because if we're painting a picture that everything is just that happens overnight, and we don't mean to do that at all.
No, it does not.
So the South Carolina Supported Decision Making Project is a really good window into just the importance of being on the cusp of what's happening, not just in disability rights within a state, but disability rights across the country, disability rights internationally. Guardianship is, as I talked about yesterday, is nothing short of an epidemic right now. Again, I can't stress this data point enough. Over 20 years, we're seeing triple the amount of people with disabilities being put under guardianship. Triple, just in 20 years' time, where we know more about success and high expectations and what's possible for all people. And so, supported decision making is a really good example of. And I talk about this stuff so much that I need to keep in mind that for the folks that aren't as aware of what supported decision making is. When students hit 18, students with disabilities hit 18, and typically, mental health related disabilities, intellectual disabilities, the push from parents and school staff is they're hitting the age of majority. If you don't want to be bumped out of the IEP process, if you don't want to be bumped out of their personal affairs, you better go to the probate court and you better get guardianship. right? That's just the language that we've been using forever. And so the supported decision-making project is a great example of we don't have time. Like it was not the case that we just had, a gap and we decided to go for some additional funding. We saw a need. This is a desperate need, not just in South Carolina, but across the country. And so we partnered with Protection and Advocacy, our Parent Training and Information Center, and one of the ARCs, the statewide ARC, to start putting together resources and training and building capacity towards getting supported decision-making as a household name, as an alternative to guardianship in the state.
And we pay these organizations, so when they write grants, guess what they do? They include us, because we included them. So we scratch their back, they scratch ours. So it's a great relationship to also share some of the funding that you receive. This program obviously started off of a need. We saw consumers, as a Center for Independent Living, we're saying, you make your choices. We're going to help you make your choices. But then we have mom and dad said, oh, they can't make their choices because I'm their guardian. That's a huge issue. So we wanted to do something about it, and so this is how that program was born.
We had a question right over here. Yeah. No, you're fine. Thank you.
I had one job, and I failed.
I can probably talk loud enough. So I'm just noticing that you guys have a lot of staff with all these programs that you're putting up. I think you guys mentioned it yesterday, how many staff you have altogether. But what would you suggest? Well, first of all, I guess I should ask, how many staff did your agency start off with? And what would you suggest for those of us that are smaller offices, like the office I work at, for example? We only have 2 full-time staff and then 2 very part-time staff. So
great
so
question.
this is where we started small, guys. We were serving, when I came on, our 704 reported that we were serving 250 consumers. And we had 5 real staff members that were actually being paid. And I think we had 2 volunteers. So, we started very small. We only had 40 staff members, and it looks like a lot, but a lot of these are shared positions too, so that's pieces of people's positions. But 40 does sound like a lot. We do have 2 offices because our territory is so large that our mileage expense would be outrageous if we only had 1 office. So we do have, technically we have 3 offices. This is what happens when you get a long lease. You grow. When you're growing an organization, we had to actually rent a second office in our Greenville location because we did not have any room to put staff, which was an issue.
Yeah, great question. My position, for instance, as Director of Transition Programs is funded by 12 different grants, roughly. So it's piecemeal. We make it happen.
And do you want to share what you started off with and how quickly you grew, like your position really quick?
Sure. So then there are more people like me out there, I promise. I was coming out after 7 years in education. I was coming off a master's in special education and sick to my stomach about how little was being taught about the ADA. Kimberly actually came and spoke to one of my classes in grad school about IL and disability rights, and it spoke to every last thing I felt in the pit of my stomach was wrong with education, and specifically, air quotes, special education. And so I was hungry for anything other than going into a broken system and trying to change everything. I came on with the potential doing some ADA assessments and information and referral, and that's where we were at that point when I came on just a year and a half ago in our programming, right? So it's just, even in the past year and a half, it's just grown exponentially.
And I'll just add, we started really small too. 8 years ago, it was Seth in a room with a candy jar. Okay.
Poor Seth.
1 program. Now we have, I don't even know how many transition and employment programs, 7, 8, and now our staff for just transition and employment services is around 28 staff. Okay, and those are mostly full-time positions. They each have their hands in a couple different programs, similar to ABLE. So.
Yeah, fantastic questions. Tim, time check. Awesome, man. We're on the same
Can we get
page.
another question here, Chuck?
Absolutely. I didn't even see you. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Just raise my hand.
Okay.
This much. So what's the population that you're serving? Like, your population of the town or the county?
Thank you. Yeah, phenomenal question.
So our reach is very, very wide. So we serve 23 counties, half the state. We have three city areas, and then the rest is rural. But we are in the capital, which does give us a little bit of an advantage with some of our advocacy.
And a lot of our programs, especially through the DD Council or the Department of Ed, as we're going to talk about in a minute, most of our youth transition programs are statewide. So we're really careful to work with the other centers in the state and not step on programming that they're doing and bring them in at any possible point as collaborators.
And then they've been doing that back with us too. So they're including us in some grants as well. So we're starting to really grow, and that's how we form that close relationship with the SILs too, because it wasn't always like that either.
Lehigh Valley is we have urban a little bit. We have Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is a little bit urban, about 250,000 people, so decent sized city. And then the rest is pretty rural. So we serve 4 counties, Lehigh, Northampton, Carbon, Monroe. Carbon, Monroe are very rural. So we have a little bit of everything.
Yeah. Okay, so the South Carolina Employment First Initiative, this is kind of, we probably should have put it at the end because this is very much an illustration of relationships and of, I hear the frustration with VR, with Voc Rehab, and the feeling that like they have the market cornered in the eyes of other professionals when it comes to transition. This is why we keep plugging on and we remain civil, things like this. So to apply for this systems change grant from ACL, so this was a grant through the Administration on Community Living. To apply for this grant, we had to have memorandums of understanding with our State Department of Education, our State Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, with our USED, which is Center for Disability Resources out of our biggest university in the state, with who else?
CDC.
Right, and with the DD Council, the Developmental Disabilities Council. So we had to have really elaborate memorandums of agreement saying that they would engage with us in employment first systems change, things like policy alignment, like opening up policies and aligning policies with employment first principles, and things that would I think would make people really nervous if there wasn't those strong relationships, despite the animosity, despite the difference in philosophy, despite all of that stuff, remaining open to that collaboration.
And I'll remind you, we had exactly 10 days to write this grant. So to get an MOU with all these people was significant. And usually state agencies don't get MOUs back so quickly. And I remember calling the director of special education services and saying, hey, listen, I'm really nervous because we really need your signature, or we really need the superintendent's signature on this MOU. And he's like, Kimberly, it usually takes 3 weeks. And I was like, I know, but what can we do? And the next day, the superintendent of education signed our MOU. I will tell you, VR originally said no to us because they did not want to share some of their policies with us, and they were seeing us kind of coming in and as kind of enforcing their agency, and we had to explain that back and forth. But I remember standing in my living room about to cry talking to VR, and I said, I'm not really understanding, we're a consumer-run organization. We used to be your consumers. And I'm not really understanding why you guys keep saying no to us and keep shutting the doors. And we ended the call. 5 minutes later, she said, hey, we're going to sign the MOU tomorrow. You got it. It takes some of these heart-to-heart conversations sometimes.
Yeah, saw a hand in the back. Is that okay?
Real quick, this is a $250,000 grant. We do share the wealth with our fellow centers. We give them about $30,000 a piece to help us with this program. They're doing some training to employers and assisting with some peer support efforts. And we do have 1 full-time staff member and 10 part-time. Yes.
Question in the back.
So my question is, I see that Lehigh Valley's unemployment rate for 2016 was 5.4, and I am in California, and the valley that I live in is a closed community. It's surrounded by a mountain range on both ends. And the unemployment rate there is 21%. And so what kind of advice could you offer for some of those programs that are linked to outcomes?
Perfect. A program evaluation from the start. So when you have that little tiny program that you're starting with, if you're starting small, asking really, really simple questions that when you put all that data together, it gives a really good picture. So we ask youth that we work with in schools, are you working? Are you competitively employed right now? And we track that through the time that we're working with them so that at the end, we can't say, it was this program that got them a job. We can say they weren't working when we started working with them. At the end, their employment rate increased by 40%. And and using those data points, people aren't usually aware of disability employment data that need to be aware of it. For instance, I know we keep picking on Voc Rehab. There are a lot of rehab counselors that I really like. I should say that. But they're not always really quick to share that data with state decision makers that need to hear it. They don't really talk about the state unemployment rate for people with disabilities, and so we share that information pretty freely, so everybody's aware of what we're looking at. There's another question.
How do you track, how do you survey the consumers, and then how long do you follow them along to make sure that they're still employed?
That's a great question and varies across programs. And I should point out some programs are like this one through ACL. ACL is very interested in outcomes, particularly for youth with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We've shaped this into a cross-disability program, the South Carolina Employment First Initiative, but this one's, they're mostly concerned with our core indicator for this program is outcomes for youth with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we wrote in tracking the frequency of competitive employment experiences while in high school, not being tracked anywhere in the state right now, so we're putting mechanisms in place to look at that. And at the time of graduation, and that's just for that program. It varies. I think program evaluation is usually one that's stipulated by the funder. We add in stuff, but that's one where you don't always have a whole lot of creative room or creative control.
And we are looking at, changing that a little bit and maybe starting with freshman year to senior just to kind of follow to show the impact that we had on the individual and what they gained.
Yeah, and we believe transition starts in elementary school. And understanding that philosophy too as we're talking with people, especially as we're working with students that are receiving special education services. Does everyone know what the purpose of the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act is? The purpose, the statement of intent at the very beginning of IDEA. So this is the law that governs all special ed services across the country. The purpose of special education from preschool through the third senior year is to prepare students. Did you have an answer? Was I going to steal your thunder? Okay. IDEA, it's the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. That's the one that started with the Education of Handicapped Children Act, All Handicapped Children Act, which was the law that provided access for the first time, full access for students with disabilities back in the mid-'70s. So it's evolved over the years. Yes?
My guess was that it was to ensure that students with disabilities received a free and appropriate public education.
Yes, but even more broadly than that, the purpose, and this is so important, and this is why we talk about becoming as sharp as possible with this stuff. The sole purpose of special ed services is to prepare students for independent living,
Bam.
further education, and employment. That's it. That's it. And so when you start talking about that, elementary school teachers don't know that. High school teachers almost never know that. So when we're talking about where centers are situated and providing services, we have to go back to speaking that language. And when you start speaking that language, it's clear that there's, like I said yesterday, there's nobody better than a center. Nobody. Okay. So we have to really motor through these last few. So this is one of the sustainability pieces. This is another one that wouldn't have come in the first year of really focusing on youth programming. This is a $70,000 annual contract with the State Department of Education. All they want us to do is go to any schools anywhere in the state and provide direct services to youth on self-advocacy, any skills that are going to increase employment rates. It's the loosest, probably the loosest funding stream we have. All they want us to do is go to schools and work with youth. And this also allows us kind of an unlimited funding stream for training professionals too. So we've been working with a lot more professionals doing trainings on stuff that we want to do trainings on.
And this is kind of a startup program right now with the Department of Education. They told us if we do a really good job, they'll give us a line item. So that's very important. So we're trying to do a very, very good job for them so we can get that permanent funding. All right, let's move.
Yes.
Okay, so really quickly, we talked about these transition conferences, mapping your future and empowering a future. There was no professional development opportunity in the state in transition. There was no single day of learning or really good learning source for families and students in transition in the state. So this was a need. We fit it. It's a small program. It's $30,000 annually. Conferences make my skin crawl. I was just telling Kimberly, doing this last one in March nearly killed me on top of what the other stuff that we're doing, but it's a need. And when you put yourself very publicly as an agency that's running, doing something that's not being done, you do it collaboratively with other agencies, you assert yourselves as someone who has a stake in transition and who's committed to keeping the ball rolling. Okay.
And we need to do this very quick, but is there any Utah sales?
Anybody
here?
from Utah?
Okay,
Woo, Utah.
well, thank you so much for doing whatever you've been doing, because we got funding for our pre-employment services because of what the SILs were doing there with working with their VR.
Yeah, Utah.
One of your directors from VR transferred to South Carolina into the South Carolina Commission for the Blind. They never contracted with the Center for Independent Living before, but because of the reputation, I had a memo in my box one day and said, hey, we want you to apply for this funding and we want to give you a significant amount of money. I was like, okay, cool. Easy.
Yeah, that's Utah.
So we get $180,000 annually. We have 2 part-time coordinators. It's funded by the South Carolina Commission for the Blind, not our VR. We spoke about that the other day. And also our wholesale network participates in this program. This is a fee for service. We provide we charge a set fee per consumer that we serve.
Yes.
We're going to skip over this because we had a question about the parent training and information centers. To get into these, you need to go have a heart-to-heart conversation with the executive director of the PTI. Their philosophies are very similar to us, a little bit reversed, but they feel that parents, it's a very peer-based philosophy. They feel that parents are the best experts at helping other parents. Guess what we believe? Consumers are the best experts at their own needs. Consumers are better with peer-related services. That's how I sold our services. And I also gave some examples of why parents should not be providing youth services. And that's why we get $26,000 annually. That's not very much, but their overall funding source is not very large. So that's a significant part of their budget, which we're very grateful for. This assists us with funding our EQUIP program. It's 7 part-time staff members. We assisted them in the process of getting the PTI grant, so we assisted them with writing their actual PTI grant. Because our PTI in our state is new. Work incentive planning, this is actually, we subcontract out from our sister organization in our state, Walton Options for Independent Living. We are focusing on youth with providing work incentive trainings. We have 3 full-time staff members and 2 part-time staff members that provide this service. And we provide a lot of outreach, and we are in the schools educating teachers, because we heard teachers before say, oh, you don't need to work, you can get on Social Security. So we do some education there.
So we're the state affiliate for the Southeast ADA Center. This was, is everyone familiar with their regional ADA network? So in the Southeast, it's, all the southeastern states are represented within the Southeast, within the Southeast ADA Center. It wasn't even a disability-related organization. It was an agency that said that they didn't even have to serve disabilities, people with disabilities, before we took over as the affiliate in South Carolina. It was the Department of Employment and Workforce, who up before WIOA said, oh yeah, people with disabilities, they go to VR. Like, oh, okay, but they were the affiliate. So this is a really cool way to just have, again, put your foot in the door as experts in the ADA, right? Centers are uniquely situated. Most people don't know anything about the ADA. People, especially people in education, they don't know anything about the ADA. And this is a foot in the door for schools, too. When you start talking with teachers or having those talks with other schools, ask them leading questions like, hey, are you talking with students about disability disclosure in the workplace and the process of securing accommodations, reasonable accommodation? Teachers will look at you like they've never heard it before because most of them haven't. They're not preparing students with it. So as the state affiliate for the Southeast ADA Center, we would be doing it anyway, but it gives us a little bit of recognition in that.
And when you transition, when you go to college, the IDEA goes away. You don't have that. So really, you've got to really rely on the Rehab Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, so it's very important. That is a key piece of legislation that you've got to educate for transition.
Yeah. And we didn't mention with Capable and Ready, the Commission for the Blind funded program. Back to that point with VR, we don't get $1 from VR. This was going in the back door with WIOA. Both, if you're in a state where it's separate services between VR and the agency that serves people with visual disabilities, it might be separate, but they still have to serve potentially eligible clients or consumers in high school in transition. So we can talk more about those. Joe made an offhand comment about just reading the regs of WIOA for fun. It's not really all that much of a joke, like get familiar with the regs. I'm volunteering Paula. Like you've got resident experts who can help you speak that language. VR in South Carolina is still labeling students as employable and not employable with no vocational assessments. So in South Carolina, I just heard from the second largest school district in the state, the VR counselor there, and this is why it's so tricky. This is why VR has the transition market cornered, because they have dedicated rehab counselors for school districts. But when I talked to the school district, she told one of the district administrators told me that VR is saying, we'll work with these classes, but not these classes of students over here, because those students are not employable. Are you serious? So understanding what VR's obligation is under WIOA shows us exactly where the window is wide open for us to say, oh man, they're supposed to be serving all potentially eligible students. We can help with that.
We go into all classrooms.
Yeah, so important stuff there, but I know it's not necessarily everything you need, but let's talk on the break and keep this conversation going. This isn't nearly as important, but if you have, Seth and Joe were talking about it, if you have transition councils, get in the transition conversations. People are having them in your state right now, and you may or may not be at the table for those. So getting at every single table you possibly can. Workforce development is big with WIOA. So within your state right now, there are large conversations happening about workforce development. They are required to serve people with disabilities as a priority population. And before WIOA, a lot of them were talking like South Carolina, like, oh, we don't really ever see anybody with a disability. We don't have to serve them. They're obligated under federal law to do so now. So find where those conversations are happening and educate them if they're not looking for you. Okay, I think we have time for maybe a quick question. Definitely have time for lots of Post-its. Okay, y'all are wonderful. Thank you so much. We know it's a lot, but we hope that you're getting what you need to keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you.